Hi, I'm Caleb Giddings from Gun Nuts Media, and today we're talking about the difference between competition shooting and self-defense shooting. Now, when we bring up this topic, it often causes consternation among some people, usually competition shooters, and also some people who focus specifically on what we call tactical or self-defense shooting. And as we get into this, we want to draw, and I especially want to draw some clear, bright lines to help people understand the most important part of any type of training to shoot, which is context. Context is the most important thing. So, as we get into this, the first thing that I really want to address is that there is a tremendous difference between the type of shooting that you do in a military context when you are supposed to close and destroy with an enemy force, the type of shooting that you do in a law enforcement context, and the type of shooting that you do in a civilian self-defense context. For the purpose of this video, we are going to ignore the military component of that, because in a military setting, you do things that if you did them as a civilian or even a law enforcement officer would wind you in prison, like suppressing fire and throwing hand grenades, all right? So we're going to ignore that entire military portion of it and focus strictly on civilian law enforcement and primarily armed self-defense, and the difference between the kind of technical shooting that you're doing versus what you do in competition. In this video, we're going to talk about three major areas where competition shooting and self-defense shooting are different and have different ideas and different things that are driving what you do and maybe even how you practice. And the first one of those, we're going to talk about scope, all right? And what do I mean when I say scope? Well, we're going to talk about the entire scope of competition versus self-defense. And primarily what we're talking about here are the stakes and what happens if I get something wrong, all right? Before we get into any of this, though, I do have to say that if you're the sort of person who thinks that, competition is training for self-defense or training is better than competition or whatever, if you can't tell the difference between a USPSA stage and a gunfight, you have no business doing either of those. You probably shouldn't do that. So, but now let's get back to what we're talking about, scope and stakes. So the scope of a match, what's at stake in a match? Well, depending on your skill level, personal improvement, pride, ego, maybe you're trying to win a major match so you can keep your sponsors happy. Who knows? That's what's at stake in a match. The consequences of making a mistake in a match are you won't win a stage, your friends might laugh at you, somebody on the internet will tell you that you suck. Not very high consequences. What's the scope of a gunfight? What's at stake in a gunfight? Well, everything is at stake in a shooting. Everything is at stake in a self-defense altercation. Whether or not the other person is trying to shoot you, everything is at stake. Your life and liberty are at stake. All right? Even if you prevail and, incapacitate your attacker before they kill or maim you, your life is still at stake. Your financial well-being is at stake. Your children's good names are at stake. You could be dragged through the newspaper, pilloried as a killer. Everything is at stake in a self-defense shooting. Everything. And the consequences of making a mistake in a self-defense shooting are astronomical. You could die. The wrong person could die. You could miss and hit an innocent person. You could shoot someone who doesn't need to be shot. So the consequences just right off the bat of killing the wrong person or yourself getting killed are staggering. And the consequences don't really improve from there. Although even if you live, like we just said, your financial well-being could be ruined. You could be sued, arrested, imprisoned. All sorts of fun and exciting things can happen to you if you make a mistake in a self-defense shooting, and if you don't. Even if you don't, some of those negative consequences can occur for you. So the stakes and the scope of a self-defense shooting is tremendous compared to a match. It's enormous. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the technical things that are different from a match to a self-defense situation. And I'm not talking about, well, you're wearing a vest or you're not wearing a vest or this sort of thing. What I'm talking about is actual shooting skills and things that are significantly different. And the first one that we're going to talk about is commitment. And what do I mean when I say commitment? Well, what I'm talking about there is when I go to do a USPSA stage, let's say it's a 24-round stage, I am committed to firing all 24 of those rounds the second the timer goes off. If I'm practicing a specific standards like the fast drill, I am committed to firing all 6 of those shots once the timer goes off. And I'm not assessing what's happening in between shots for this, all right? I'm drawing that gun. Let's say I'm shooting a bill drill, and I'm shooting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and yeah, I'm watching the sights lift and fall, or maybe not, depending on how I track the sights, but no force in the verse is going to stop me from shooting all 6 of those shots. Now, if I do that in a self-defense shooting, I could end up in a lot of trouble because I'm not assessing the sights and I'm not assessing what's happening downrange. A good example of this, and something that I've talked about in the past, is you look at self-defense shootings that have gone to trial, where people have been put on trial, and one of the things that you see that's not a common thread, but it's happened enough times that people make note of it, is what causes some of these to go to trial is bad guys who got shot in the back. And the reason they got shot in the back isn't because the person who shot them was trying to murder them. It's because that person was firing as fast as they could pull the trigger and not assessing what was happening to the target. And that target took some hits in the center of mass and twisted and started to fall or rotate, and then took some hits in the ribs, and then took some hits in the back. And so it went to trial, all right? One of the interesting things that I like to talk about is I like to talk about Los Angeles Police Department's Metro Division and the way they teach shooting. And the reason I like to talk about this is they teach you not to outrun your headlights. They teach you that you're not committed to empty your magazine once you start firing. You are committed to fire the appropriate number of rounds necessary to solve the problem. So how do they do this? Well, LA Metro teaches on a 0.3 to 0.5 second split cadence, all right? Splits being the time in between shots. Now, us competition guys know that I can fire a bill drill and I can whack out 0.2 second, maybe 0.18 second, maybe 0.15 if I'm feeling really salty splits all day long. And that's great. And you should train that. Even if you never went to shoot faster than 0.35 or 0.5 in an actual defensive scenario, you should train to be able to shoot 0.18 splits and 0.2 splits, because if I can accurately shoot 0.2 splits, shooting a 0.35 split is easy. And the reason why LAPD, and honestly why I like that 0.35, 0.5 cadence, is because it allows you to process what's going on with your target. It takes humans about 0.3-ish seconds to react to visual stimuli. So if I'm looking at a light and when that light turns red, I have to release my thumb off a button that I have depressed, the fastest reaction time I've gotten doing that is like 0.25 or so. So it takes the average person 0.3 to 0.4 seconds to react to visual stimuli. And that's the time where if you're shooting and you're going bang, 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 oh, I don't need to shoot anymore, it gives you the ability to do that. So That's a huge difference. In a self-defense or law enforcement type shooting, I probably don't want to shoot faster than 0.35 or zero point 0.5 splits. And you have to be able to acknowledge the difference, all right? 0.2 splits and 0.15 splits are great in a competition context, and you should train to be able to do that. Even if you're never going to shoot a match, you should train to be able to do that, because if I can shoot a 0.2 split all day long, then when I need to shoot a 0.35 split and I need to assess my sights and I need to assess the threat, I'll be able to do that with control. And as an aside, this is just a personal preference bit. That's one of the reasons I also like guns like the 92D or the SIG DAK or the HK LEM trigger for law enforcement and personal protection work, because it's really hard to outrun your sights with one of these guns, all right? Even if I'm shooting this as fast as I can, I can only get about 0.22, maybe 0.25 splits with this gun. And what's even better is if I'm shooting this and going bang, 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 that was 0.35 splits all day, and I was able to easily assess what's happening. So that's just an aside. I like the DAK, the LEM, and the old double action Berettas. I think those make great cop guns, and I'm sort of bummed that they're not cop guns anymore, and I kind of wish they should be. All right, and we've got one more thing that we want to talk about with regards to self-defense versus competition. The last thing that we're going to talk about, the last major difference, is preparedness. When do you prepare for a match? Well, probably the night before, and then during the stages and stuff like that, because I know when the match is coming. Like, I know what day it is. I know when it's going to start. I know what stage I'm going to start on. That's when I prepare for the match. How do you prepare for a shooting that you don't know when or where or if it's ever going to happen? Well, you have to do that kind of sort of all the time if you're serious about this. And I don't mean that you should be a paranoid person. That's not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is your daily life is your walkthrough. That's your stage walkthrough for what could happen. And it's not a bad exercise when you're walking your dog or going to the gym or driving your car to work or walking through a parking lot to mentally rehearse what you would do in these situations, and be realistic with yourself. Don't, assume that your shooting is going to be some guy jumping and going, ha ha, see, give me your money. Because that's probably not what it will be. But that's your walkthrough. And so the preparedness aspect is different, because when you're preparing for a match, you know when it's going to start. When you're preparing for a lethal self-defense encounter, you have no idea. And so you need to make use of the time that you have. Especially, I do like to do this, especially in transitional spaces. And transitional spaces are things like gas stations, Walmart parking lots, bus stations, stuff like that. It's places where people don't live. It's where they pass through. And if you look, that's where loads and loads of crime happens. So when you're in a transitional space, turn your situational awareness up, watch what's going on around you, and do a mental run through. What would you do if something like this happens? And I did say that was the last thing we're going to talk about, but I want to hit just one more thing. Competition shooting makes you better at self-defense shooting. And it goes back to what I talked about, where if I can shoot a 0.2 split on command in a match, then when my performance degrades under life or death stress, I'll still be able to shoot 0.35 splits. And something that's very important to understand is the way the brain works, all right? Your brain treats all stress as kind of the same thing. Psychological stress, life or death stress. It's all kind of treated as the same chemicals firing, all right? So if you start to get good at competition shooting and you have that stress, that desire to win, you feel the crowd watching you, you worry about making mistakes, that psychological stress is the best way to inoculate yourself as a private citizen against the sort of stress that you're going to encounter in a life or death situation. Doing push-ups before you practice alone isn't the same thing. Physiological stress and psychological stress are two different things, and the body treats them two different ways. But all mental stress, it kind of lumps into the same category. So giving yourself the ability to perform under stress is good, all right? You must pressure test your skills, and the only real effective place to pressure test your skills under psychological stress is the competition environment. And the last thing it does, the last benefit that it has, is that it teaches you automaticity in your gun handling, okay? The less you have to think about what's going on here and here, the more you can think about what's going on there. The better you can assess the threat, the smarter choices that you can make in the event that you have to use this to solve a real-world problem. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. We're getting ready to start offering open enrollment classes through Miami Gun Training, a company that I have just founded. When these classes are ready, you'll be able to sign up for them at miamiguntraining.com, which there's a link to in the description below this video. Thanks for watching. I'm Caleb Giddings. Until next time, remember, run your gun, not your mouth.